Hello. So this video today is going to be about the 6 Traits of Writing program, and it's less a program and more a kind of an assessment structure because it takes ideas about writing and values them in particular ways, which enable the creation of some rubrics and so on. But what I want to call your attention to here is that the 6 Traits of Writing seems like in so many ways that it was designed to address key problems in the teaching of writing, things that teachers found were difficult over and over again. One of the things that teachers have found is that when you give kids writing assignments, they get uber focused on length and how long does it have to be, and that means that they're much more focused on task completion than they are on effective writing. And also, writing teachers have found that kids are constantly coming up to them asking them, is this good? Is this good? And that ongoing need for the validation that things are going well with the writing. And then just a basic question of, I don't know what to write. And the reason that I'm doing this later in the semester instead of earlier in the semester is that an effective approach to working with the 6 Traits for Writing really does depend on a deep classroom library of mentor text. It's going to be much better to teach with 6 Traits if you are teaching from authentic text and towards writing authentic text than if the 6 Traits are just kind of in a vacuum by themselves, because the traits themselves don't make sense without a sense of purpose and audience and a sense for how different types of texts work. So I'm going to pull this off. The key thing that all of us need to understand about the 6 Traits approach to writing is that it was actually teachers who put this together. So the Northwest Regional Educational Laboratory back in the, if I'm right, it's the late 1990s, mid 1990s, pulled together hundreds and hundreds of writing teachers across all grade levels, kindergarten all the way through college, and asked them to show up at a conference in Oregon and bring as many samples of good writing as they could bring. And they weren't giving them any ideas, just we trust you to be able to bring in samples of people who have figured it out. And we want you to come in and help us figure out what good writing actually is. So we had hundreds of school teachers, college teachers, kindergarten teachers, middle school teachers, elementary teachers, all together in this hotel conference area, all staying there for like 3 or 4 days together. And their task was to show up and put all of these samples of writing out on the tables. And they gave everybody an introduction which was that we trust you as the teachers of writing to tell us that these are good samples of writing. Everything here on all of these tables has had somebody tell us this is good writing. So what we want you to do is we want you to go around and read all of these samples and tag them. So they had like little shoe boxes that you could put little notes in that said, here's why this is good writing. And for every piece of writing that was there, they were supposed to put down a little sheet of paper, throw it in the box that said, this is why this is good writing. So over the 3 or 4 days that they were all together, they pretty much took all of this good writing and coded it, put these descriptions together that said why it was good writing. Then the people from the Northwest Regional Education Laboratory took all of the little slips of paper and started to sort them and categorize them to see if they could figure out, are there super common elements here where people across all grade levels, so you have college professors who teach writing, evaluating the kindergarten pieces of writing and saying what makes this good writing, and vice versa, the kindergarten teachers looking at college level writing and saying this is why this is a good writing sample. So a very diverse approach to talking about what counts as good writing. And then they took all of these little slips and started to put them into categories to see what the common elements were. So the key thing that I like to emphasize here is that this began from a positive samples approach to things. And the difference between that and something like a test is that the test usually starts from the idea of even if it's criterion referenced, how can you put wrong or bad examples into your test so that if people choose the wrong or bad example, they've clearly missed the correct piece. But with 6 Traits of Writing, we're just looking at what is a positive sample of writing. And that group evaluation, what makes this writing good, the common elements across all the educational levels, this yielded a very interesting product, which was these 6 traits of good writing. So across those hundreds of samples, across all of those ideas that were in those pieces of writing, they found these 6 traits. And when you see these 6 traits presented, you usually see them presented in an order. And the order is actually important because what they found was that there was an emphasis in good writing in all of the structure of these little notes that people had out there. There was a value for ideas, organization, and voice. And this has a lot to do with the content and structure, but it's important to point out that these items are deep structure. And these are things that were difficult for many writing teachers to evaluate. I think a lot of good writing teachers were evaluating these kinds of things, but for most of us in the world, when we were just kind of thrown out there and said, yeah, you got to teach writing, you're a language arts teacher, you're a 5th grade teacher, even a college professor gets assigned a course, and it's like you have to go out there and just kind of make it up out of nothing. It's far easier for us when we're evaluating people's writing to focus on surface structure, because it's easy to mark, code, grade, give feedback on, and so on. And also surface structure errors are distracting to us because we can see them. It's far harder to talk about deep structure and get focused on that as teachers. So one of the best things that we got out of 6 traits was this value and focus on ideas, organization, and voice. And that really shifted the conversation over the past 25 years away from spelling errors and grammar errors and so on. And those spelling errors, grammar errors, and so on did get weight. They got a fair amount of emphasis in the coding that the people did at NWREL, as well as sentence fluency and word choice. So things that you can look at right on the paper and say, that's a really simple thing that you can do to make your writing more effective. This still gave a better approach to feedback, because the idea of conventions really did start to emerge from this 6 traits, which is the idea that you do these things because you're trying to deliver ideas, or you're trying to do a particular kind of organization, or you're trying to help your voice come out. So all of these conventions suddenly became purposeful things rather than just little things you have to memorize and parrot back. So all of these things, these 6 traits, ideas, organization, voice, word choice, sentence fluency, and conventions, are much easier to work with if you have a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of who you're writing to. And that's one of the reasons why I always like to come back to some of the principles that we've already worked with. It's much easier for me to talk about organization if I have a piece of mentor text here, my Swiss Miss box. I've got this sort of persuasive text on the back here. I've got the nutrition labels here, but let's just look at this piece right here. See my directions for how to make Swiss Miss hot chocolate? Like, we need a lot of directions to make hot chocolate from a packet, but there it is. It's writing, isn't it? And somebody got paid to write that one day. It was probably a staff writer for ConAgra, or somebody that worked for the graphic design department there. But somebody wrote that and got paid for it. So if I look back at my 6 traits, what are the most important things about an effective piece of how-to, an effective directions sequence? And I always come back to the idea that, okay, that gives us a sense that these traits are not always equal. And you don't often hear people talk about it this way, so I'll post some documents that would help you work with this. But if you think about it, if you don't have strong organization on the directions for how to make hot chocolate, you're not really following the genre, because that genre is more about organization, way more about organization than it is about voice. So if I'm going to have people writing this kind of writing, and I want to talk about what makes it good and the deep structure side of it, I'm going to focus much more on organization and also what the ideas are, and I'm going to suppress voice. So I'm going to weight them. And I do that by ranking them, so that ideas, I'm going to rank it as like a 6, and maybe this is a 5, and then I'm going to rate this as like a 0 or a 1, so that when I do my scoring on the rubric, it will get multiplied out by ideas and organization, so that those two end up getting scored higher. And if kids need to make improvements, that's where the low score comes from, is from that area, which means that if you got a low score in organization on your directions for how to make something, then you really need to go back and improve it. So what are some other authentic texts? So here's my Magic the Gathering card. This card, you can see that sentence fluency is something that's going to be suppressed, because that idea of how sentences give move one to the other, and that sort of approach to sentence fluency. I have a little bit of sentence fluency here in the description of this beast and its effect. So I have a little bit of sentence fluency, which means that I'll probably rate it at a 1, weight it at a 1. And then when I multiply that out later, it'll be like, okay, was your sentence, your single sentence that you had to write, did it have a flow to it and a fluency? But I'm not super worried about that. The way I am if I'm writing a piece of persuasive writing like this. The persuasive writing here, I'm going to rate sentence fluency and word choice a little bit higher, weight them a little bit higher, so that when I come back and score it, I can give people feedback, and the score will reflect the importance of those things, so that if they want to really raise their score on the rubric, they go back in and work on what's most important. And with this packet, with this persuasive text, voice is also much more important, just that sentence at the end. So from all of us to you, enjoy a relaxing moment with Swiss Miss. You warm the home, we'll warm the heart. There's really this sort of persuasive, almost sort of propaganda-like approach, right? They really want you to believe that if you drink their hot chocolate, you're going to be involved with good people, and by association, you're going to be good people too. So seed packets, what makes good writing for a seed packet? There's a lot of graphic design on this, as there is on the Swiss Miss. And this is something that came up after about a year of the 6 traits rubrics being out there, which is that teachers came back over and over again and said, yes, all of these things matter, but we find also that presentation matters too. And I think I really pushed back on that when it happened, because it was people coming back and saying, I don't care how good your ideas are, you have to have good handwriting. And I think that the more healthy way to approach that is to say that, a strong piece of writing, a good piece of writing, usually does have some sort of a visual presentation to it that helps us see that it does look right. And handwriting is certainly part of that, but I think that letting kids use computers to do some of their writing is also an important solution, so that they can feel like, yeah, it looks good because I used professional level equipment to make it work. So a lot of this has to do with figuring out how you can maybe make some templates for things that kids might be making for you. Food packaging, how can you make a template for that? Brochures, super easy. There are templates for that inside Microsoft Word or in Canva that you can use. And let's see, other templates. Invitations, there are templates for invitations, there are templates for greeting cards, and so on. And you should be able to find decent templates for things like maps and so on. I'm going to come back to another book. I think I may have featured this book before. We used this book when we were working on a social studies inquiry unit on plague and disease. And so we have a really good example here. So the title of the book, How They Croaked, Awful Ends of the Awfully Famous. We've got people like Henry VIII here, and a full story about how Henry VIII eventually died. And then also a lot about the wives that died along the way too. An interesting book because it is really strong on voice, taking a kind of irreverent TV-like approach to famous people's deaths. And clearly on the cover, a skeleton with a doctor's reflector and a pointing finger like he's going to give us our lectures on how these people died, a very irreverent approach to the subject. And you see that throughout the writing, that voice is important. So one of the things that I'm going to post for you that should be an important resource for you is that after the 6 traits came out, teachers started figuring out, oh, well, if I want to teach these 6 traits, the best way to do it is to take mentor text and demonstrate effective writing rather than me getting up and trying to squeeze it out of myself and put up an example that's okay that I wrote. It's great to be able to show how you're working on voice, how you're working on ideas, how you're working on organization, but it's super effective to take something like a death certificate and say, this is a great example of organization, because once you have the template, it's already kind of organized for you, but you also want to write in an organized way as you go through it. So one of the resources that I've got for you is that I have a stack of shelves from Goodreads. Goodreads.com allows people to organize all of their books into shelves, which is just a bookish way of tagging them. So these tags enable people to put together shelves, and there are shelves for how teachers teach these traits using children's literature. So I'm going to post a whole bunch of shelves in this week's module so that you can see, here are the books that teachers are using to teach voice. Here are the books that teachers are using to teach organization. And these are not textbooks or professional books. These are lists of children's literature that people are using in their classroom library, and they've gone through and flagged those pieces of children's literature or put them in a bin so that they're organized by these 6 traits. So when they need to come up with a good example of a book that is strong in ideas, they're able to go get one of these books, pull it out, and show, here's a passage that shows what it's like to effectively present an idea that you have. So I'll stop there, but it's just kind of a brief introduction to what you're going to be getting into. I hope you can appreciate that it's much more important for you to have your classroom library with a variety of mentor texts in place, and to have the tradition in your classroom of reading a lot of mentor text and trying to figure out, can I write something like this? Having that playful experience so that you have the audience and the purpose strong, so that when you start going for these ideas, organization, and voice, it's all purposeful, all motivated by something really specific. So also getting that focus put onto deep structure rather than surface structure, like is really easy for us in teaching writing, to get lost in surface structure. The last thing I want to say is that working with rubrics like the 6 traits rubric really does help us to figure out what really needs feedback for a particular kid to score well. Research on teaching writing has come back over and over again telling us you can only focus on one thing to improve when you take a kid's piece of writing. And using a rubric like this, especially the weighted way that I was talking about a little while ago, really helps you come back and say, if you wanted this to be better, you would go here to organization and work on that. And let's talk about what that would look like. And then I can go back to my mentor text and say, here's an example of how something like that is usually organized. Let's talk about it again. That kind of thing should have come out in a study, if we did a study. Again, get the classroom library in place. Use the classroom library as your way of getting towards your purposes for writing. And that also gets us to the point where we're doing far less of our classroom writing based on giving kids a prompt or feeding them a prompt. It's all about what you want to write, for what purpose, and for which people. All right.